We are live now.
Good, Sukanya. So let's start. It's 6:30. We have quite a packed program. Avantika, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you. Could I request the slides also?
I'll put them on. Go ahead.
We've got slideshow view. Perfect. So good evening, everybody. Welcome to this event co-hosted by the Center for Science and Environment and Down to Earth magazine. I'm Avantika Goswami, the Program Manager for Climate Change at CSE, and I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening. Among the various solutions proposed to address the climate crisis, carbon markets are a hotly debated issue. Today, we will launch our new report titled Discredited, which focuses on one category of carbon markets, the voluntary carbon market, and more specifically on the workings of this market in India. And you will soon see why that is significant. This is also featured as this month's special edition of Down to Earth magazine. Discussing the report today will be the project team. We have Sunita Narayan, CSE's Director General, who has shaped this project and has also laid out the vision for the way forward. And we will hear from Trishant Dev of CSE's Climate Change Program and Rohini Krishnamurthy of Down to Earth, who are the core investigators in this project who have conducted extensive field research and analysis. Lastly, while the voluntary market has been in the news often in the past few years, often for the wrong reasons, what sets our study apart is that we spoke to the communities on the ground in India who are conducting the emissions reduction activities that generate these carbon credits. In doing so, what we have attempted to do is to essentially capture their voices in this vast ecosystem. So we hope you find the insights useful as we head towards COP28. With that, I'll hand over to Sunita ma'am to give her opening comments.
Thank you, Avantika, and thank you, Trishant and Rohini, for this amazing work that you have done over the last 6 months. So it's as Avantika said, I mean, see, you have to understand that we are not against carbon markets. We believe that carbon markets have the potential to unlock investment, because what you really do is to generate credits from projects which are doing work to reduce emissions, either through sequestering emissions, through planting trees, or avoiding emissions through renewable projects. And those credits are used to offset emissions of companies, oil companies, and others. Now, so there is a potential of using the market for change. Under the Kyoto Protocol, it was agreed that the market would be put to use, and the clean development mechanism was devised. But its design was flawed. And as a result of it, we soon realized that it was the cheap development mechanism. Now we are standing at a very important time. At COP28, the world will discuss Article 6 of the Paris Agreement, which has rules for a global carbon market, bilaterally or a global market. Now, it is for that reason, it is very important for us to understand how does the voluntary market, which is today the only market, the big market in the world, how is that operating? How is it functioning? Is it really mitigating emissions? And using that learning, what should then be the rules that are devised for the future? So which is why our study is about the voluntary carbon market, which is the market in operation. It is about the market and its operations in India, and it is about a deep dive into the offset projects where the communities are either getting cook stoves or biogas plants to reduce emissions. I will now ask my colleague Trishant to give you an overview of the market and how it operates. Trishant.
Thank you, Sunita ma'am. Hello, everyone. To start with, I'd like to briefly describe the voluntary carbon market to everyone. from the get-go, we'd like to emphasize that the voluntary carbon market is a sophisticated ecosystem. The VCM is primarily represented by independent carbon crediting programs, such as Verra's Verified Carbon Standard or the Gold Standard. These are the entities that register projects which are eligible and issue carbon credits through their respective registries. Now, the whole ecosystem can be explained in two parts. The supply side, where we have project developers who design the projects and are responsible for taking the projects for registration and getting the carbon credits issued. They also engage what are called the verifier and validator bodies. These are third-party entities that basically validate the project and verify the emission reductions. And once these things are done, the registries issue carbon credits to the project. The registries also maintain a record of these projects. Once the carbon credits are issued, they are ready to be sold in the market. Now, the market is represented by what is called the demand side. It has traders, carbon exchanges, marketplace, and a whole lot of in-betweeners who eventually, which eventually leads us to the end buyer, who basically uses the carbon credit or retires the carbon credit to offset its own emissions. To the next slide, please. Now, this voluntary carbon market was worth $2 billion in 2021. The two leading registries have issued carbon credits equivalent to avoiding or sequestering about 1.4 billion tons of greenhouse gas emissions. The table on the right that you are seeing, it basically represents sector-wise breakup of different project categories and the corresponding credits issued to these projects. Next slide. If we were to draw our focus to India, it is worth noting that India happens to be the second largest carbon credit supplier in the world in the voluntary carbon market. About 298 million carbon credits were issued till mid-2023 to Indian-based projects. And this is worth almost 10% of India's greenhouse gas emissions in 2020. And this is not a small number. India has supplied over 1/5 of the carbon credits in the roughly $2 billion carbon market. Next slide. Now, this is the list of top carbon credit project developers in the VCM in 2022. In the list, there are 3 Indian entities, but only one, that is EKI Energy Services. It's an Indian company, has seen a phenomenal growth in the number of projects, and therefore, not surprisingly, we see that Mr. Manish Dapkara, the chairman of EKI Services, speaking at a public event this year, said that while the energy prices were increasing and consequently more fossil fuel-based emissions took place, countries have net zero emission ambitions to keep, and thus more demand for carbon credit is expected. Definitely good for business, but not very good for the environment and the climate change issues, he said. Next slide. So let me take this on, Trishant. So, when we investigated this, we started this, and I have to say, when I asked Avantika and Trishant and Rohini to begin to look at the voluntary carbon market, firstly, we had no idea of the scale of India. We thought that we should just look at something that we thought was a small part of the puzzle. The one thing that we found was that the rule of this market, the only rule, if I may say, is secrecy. We have met with the number of roadblocks that I have never, we have done a lot of investigations, both at CSE and down to earth. But I have to tell you that I have never personally seen such a shroud of secrecy as I found in this market. Firstly, we found there is no government database on the number of voluntary carbon market projects.
Then when Trishant started looking at Verra and Gold Star and downloading each project and information, we created a database. The database we found had 1451 projects in India. When we approached the companies, we were told that there is no information they can share because they are under confidentiality clauses. There was no information about project sites, no information on price, the beneficiaries. Using the database, we basically identified the project developers, the project sites, and we were still blocked. And it is really amazing for me how we finally on this trail, both Rohini and Trishant and Avantika, how we managed to find these 40 locations, 5 project categories that we selected in 4 states to look at improved cook stoves, afforestation projects, the alternate wetting and drying rice production. I mean, if I take you back to just so that for a minute, if you look at this table, you will see that the number of projects registered in India, 10 projects for the number of credits issued, percentage of credits, this is in agriculture. Now, this is the methane reduction in the rice production. If you look at forestry, this is another part of a very major part of the projects being registered in India. This is about sequestering, planting trees. Household and community, 121 projects registered. And the number of projects here are large. Now, these are really about both the household chulas, improved cook stoves, as well as biogas plants. And then, of course, there's renewable energy. This is a major part of India's portfolio and, of course, global portfolio. Now, in that, when we identified, we wanted to find in each category projects. We also wanted to clearly identify the big players. We've tried to do that through the visits that we have made in Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Telangana, and Andhra Pradesh to project sites to understand all 4 of these 5 categories that we will talk about. But you have to understand the level of secrecy. I mean, we have been told that by EKI, which we have published in Down to Earth, EKI officially wrote to us after so many times we reached out to them. And in our report, we have given a list of the number of times we have corresponded with these companies and met with no response. Final response from EKI was, at this point, the company is in a silent period and we will not be able to respond. So whether they were refused to give us information about their project sites, about the details of price, the details of benefit sharing, carbon credits, nothing. When another company told us they were bound by confidentiality of law. They even told us to sign a non-disclosure agreement, another company. One company, which was the most fascinating for us being an Indian group, was a Paris-based investor fund called Livelihood Fund, which actually wrote to us officially saying that we cannot go to the project site because there are very poor road conditions during the monsoons, as well as insurgency concerns. So this is unsafe. We cannot take you there. So this is the kind of responses which we finally got after many, many tries. Now it's clearly a business which only thrives in darkness. What we found, and now I will ask Rohini to take us through 2 of the case studies that she visited. Rohini.
Thank you, ma'am. Hello, everybody. So the first case was improved cook stoves. And so improved cook stoves are designed to reduce fuel wood consumption and thereby reduce carbon dioxide emissions. And so distribution of cook stoves has picked up in the recent years, and over 300 cook stove projects were added to key registries in 2022 alone, and they are mostly from South Asia and Africa. So we visited villages, as many as 13 villages in Karnataka and Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka and Madhya Pradesh. And these are implemented. So one project in Karnataka was implemented by Greenway Grounding Private Limited, and the other in Madhya Pradesh was by Eki Energy Services. The stoves are manufactured by Greenway and are being sold at a subsidized rate of rupees 2,350. The Eki energy cook stoves were either given for free or, people were charged about 150 to 200 rupees per cook stove. So Greenway and Eki were actually given a clean chip, citing that there were no additionality issues, meaning that the project would not have existed without carbon revenue. And they were recommended for registration under Gold Standard and Verra. So coming to the issues, we found that there is overestimation of emission reduction. So the developers assumed that the target population primarily used biomass and that they would shift to low emission appliances without any incentive for behavior change. However, in all households we visited, we found that people use multiple sources, including LPG. So the question is if this emission reduction actually happens. So in 2016, the Indian government launched its social welfare scheme called Pradhan-Mantri Ujjwala Yojana, which provided 50 million concessional LPG connections to women of below the poverty line households. And therefore, the actual emission reductions would depend on the use and not just mere distribution. And another issue that we found was there's no robust monitoring happening. So as for who benefits, the market price of Eki's stove is between rupees 1,500 to 3,000, and Greenway's market price is 3,290. And we assume that the emission offset per cook stove is 3 tons or 3 tons of carbon dioxide equivalent or 3 carbon credits. We calculated the average price per carbon credit and it's around 700. The carbon revenue earned per cook stove, Eki could earn like 15,687 over its 7-year life period, and Greenway would earn around 10,000 in its 5-year lifespan. So communities either receive a free cook stove or they are charged, and there is absolutely no incentive. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The second project was the afforestation project carried out by Livelihoods Funds in collaboration with the Hyderabad-based Nandi Foundation. So this is being implemented in the Araku Valley and in the Eastern Ghats of Andhra Pradesh. And the project started in 2010, but it was officially registered in 2014. And some 6,000 hectares of land over 333 villages have come under this project. So the tribal communities have set up plantations on their land, and the carbon credits earned are owned by the project developer, which is Livelihoods Funds, and they've signed an agreement through Nandi Foundation acting on behalf of them. So the agreement agreement states that the farmers have given up their carbon rights for 20 years, and the farmers that we spoke with, were not aware of carbon credits. So in its 20 years period, the project document that we reviewed claims that it would reduce 1.6 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and based on a conservative price of $8 per credit, this would amount to $12.8 million in 20 years, roughly 100 crores. But these credits are not being sold in the open market. They're claimed by the investors of livelihood funds. So we found 2 issues with the project. One is additionality. So there is a government body called the Integrated Tribal Development Agency, which has been contributing to afforestation since 1990, and they have also been given, free saplings as well as trainings to the tribal farmers. And coming to the benefits, the only benefits that the farmers under livelihood under this particular project is that they're getting free saplings and trainings, but the proceeds from the sale of carbon credits, they're not getting any bit of that. So the investors are benefiting. And when we looked at who is retired, these credits on the Verra registry, we found that Michelin Group claimed offsets for its employees' travel. And but there's no other information we found apart from this. And Avian claimed carbon neutrality based on planting trees in partnership with Livelihoods Funds. The third project that we saw was alternate wetting and drying. So this, we actually looked at 2 projects, one in Telangana and the other in Madhya Pradesh. And both of them are awaiting registration. So these projects follow alternate wetting and drying, where where they inundate and dry their fields alternatively. And the goal is to it could reduce methane emissions by an average of 43%. The conventional method of paddy cultivation actually contributes to 2% of the global greenhouse gas emissions from human sources. So the Telangana project is being implemented by Co-Carbon-X and the Madhya Pradesh one by VMB. And both of them have signed agreements with farmers, and the farmers have relinquished their rights to the developers, rights to carbon credits to the developers. And as for revenue, so the farmers have been promised revenue if they follow this method, and the farmers in Telangana are expected to get rupees 1,920 per hectare per annum. And for the VMB project, there's each participating group comprising of 60 to 65 farmers would receive a financial support of rupees 50,000, which is roughly 800 rupees per farmer per year. And that is to cover the operational expenses. So the questions that remain is if this incentives that the farmers will be getting is sufficient to drive the change, and if the methodology is robust enough to estimate emission reductions. I'll now pass the floor to Trishant.
Trishant?
Thank you, Rohini. The next case that we looked at was household-based biogas projects. A biogas plant converts organic waste into methane and organic fertilizer, reducing GHG emission in two ways. First, it prevents methane release from manure and open air and replaces GHG-producing fuels like wood with biogas. We visited some places in Madhya Pradesh to look into a couple of these projects. For the first project, we paid a visit to Ratlam district. A village named Alnia had families owning biogas plants, some of which are counted under a carbon credit project registered with Verra. The other set of locations belong to a project registered with the Gold Standard and has commissioned about 14,000 biogas plants in the Jabalpur region, specifically in the districts of Siuni, Balaghat, Chhindwara, and Jabalpur. Next slide. But there are issues with the project. For one, for the first project, we found that the biogas plants, which were claimed under carbon offset, had been paid for by the Madhya Pradesh government's subsidy program. And a part of it has even been paid for by the poor beneficiaries. But there's a more significant point to this, and that is that the carbon credits for biogas would earn between $16 to 56 per year for 7-year crediting period. That's roughly about 1,390 to 4,617 rupees. But this is a very small percentage compared to the cost of building a biogas plant. That is about $364 or rupees 30,000. Then there's the cost of maintenance and labor. So this clearly represents a very small cost. We can say that clearly that the households are paying for the biogas. They are paying for the reduction of emissions of a rich buyer. The credits being taken by rich polluters are being done on the back of the poorest. They are actually subsidizing the rich. Next. The next case is the curious case of renewable energy projects. The renewable energy projects make up the biggest share of voluntary carbon market portfolio in India. There are about 675 registered projects for 268 million credits issued. 148 million of which have been retired, meaning they have been claimed by some company towards their offsetting emissions. Next slide. So we did some analysis on this renewable energy projects. We estimated the carbon finance for these projects based on the issued credits. And it turns out the offset represents between 3 to 5% of the capital cost of the project for the first crediting period. This means that the project is not being built or has become viable because of this carbon credit. Project developers are actually claiming offsets premised on this assumption. And yet, this is something we do not observe through our analysis. With this, I'd like to request Sunita ma'am to take over and move on to the next section. Thank you.
Thank you, Trishant. Thank you, Rohini. I think as all of you have heard, and the conclusions are fairly clear, but let me repeat them. Our conclusion is that this entire purpose of this market, this paraphernalia that has been built up, the registry, as Trishant said, both Gold Star, which has been created by a number of people in the environment and conservation field, as well as Verra, which is created by the corporate sector, the registry, the project developers, and you saw the list of project developers, many of them are top Indian companies today. There are auditors, there are verifiers, there are validators. The entire purpose of the market, in our view, seems to be to serve their interest, not to serve the interest of climate change or mitigation of emissions. In fact, we will go as far as to say that this market is not about mitigating emissions. This is not the purpose of the design of the current voluntary carbon market. And worse, it could end up increasing emissions of the world. Why do I say that? So just consider, many of you, when you take a flight, just take a look at the airline ticket that you have bought and it will say that the airline, that this flight is carbon neutral because the airline has offsetted its emissions. Or today, oil companies talk about how they are carbon neutral, that they have offset emissions. In fact, Shell is one of the largest investors in EKI today as its for its offset business. Or Gucci, which has come under some cloud, but if you buy a bag, a luxury goods brand, they would say that this bag you can buy because in the manufacture of this bag, whatever emissions there are, we have offset them. So essentially what you're doing in this world is to say, the polluters are saying we can continue to pollute because we have cleaned up by buying our emissions from other parts of the world. So we can continue our emissions, or we can even increase our emissions. But as our investigation shows, many of these credits are overestimated, or in the case of renewable energy, which is the bulk of the credits in India, they have not led to the change. It is not because of the credits that have been got that the solar project came on board. That's only less than 5% of the capital cost of the project. So it's really a double jeopardy. And at a time when you are reading about everything from Sikkim yesterday and the horrific disaster that we've had with loss of lives, or if you talk about New York, we know very clearly that climate risks are today beyond measure. So we are really saying to you that in our climate risk world, from our investigation, we would go on record to say that the world does not need this shady, secretive business of creative carbon accounting. We would in fact set up then the agenda for the carbon markets. One, we are saying, please design the projects at COP28 for transparency. We must know the details of the project, the price of each credit, the beneficiaries, simply the rules of good governance, which we are always being preached to, must be followed by this market. Why is this market such a secretive, closed club? And the new market that the governments are making should not be like it as well. Two, we are saying pay the price of real change. Design the market to invest in projects that will lead to real reduction in emissions. As Trishant very clearly showed you, our analysis shows that renewable energy projects, the offsets or the carbon market pays for 3 to 5% of the cost. It does not make the project viable. Then how can you take a credit for it? It will never have happened. In a biogas project, which I think is immoral as well. The carbon markets pay 2 to 7% of the capital cost. So as we showed you, it is the MP government which is investing in this project through its subsidy program, or in fact, the poor farmer which is investing. So the rich are today claiming offsets and are being subsidized by poor governments and poor people. And it's the same with nature-based solutions, planting trees. So our advice is, our recommendation is that the future carbon market, voluntary and official, must put a floor price to carbon credits. Our analysis also shows us, and our research shows us, that the Rwandan government, in fact, has a proposal of $30 should be the floor price. We believe this could be a starting point or even higher. But the fact is, we need to make sure that there is a floor price and that these projects and the project cost is actually real. We're also saying don't shortchange people or the planet. If you look at the Chula, which Rohini explained to you, even if it is given free, which EKI claims that it is done, it would only add up to 20% of what the developer would earn in a 5 to 6 year lifespan of the project. Is this the right way to design a market where 80% of the money is kept with the project developer, the verifier, the validator, the monitoring agency, everyone else, not the community? And we say this particularly because if you expect behavior change, then people must benefit. What is the incentive today for households to use the device, to not cut the tree or to utilize the biogas energy project? In fact, the original Zimbabwean government proposal was to share substantial proceeds, 70% of the proceeds directly with communities. But as we have seen in the news over the last few months, presumably because of the extremely high pressure and the power of the voluntary carbon market, this proposal by the Zimbabwean government has been now diluted, and it's down to 30% to government and the rest with the developer. The other point, and this is something we should learn from the CDM, the complicated development mechanism that the world designed, that these design of these markets, if they are very complicated, then they're actually designed for fudge and fraud. We need to keep the design as simple as possible and in the hands of public institutions. Today, it is completely baffling to us is that this entire army of verifiers, developers, auditors, fancy people in fancy offices, they cannot even get the maths right. I mean, a kindergarten child will tell you that a mere gift of an improved cook stove does not add up to its use. And so you cannot account for emission reduction based on the fact that you've gifted an improved cook stove. Same with biogas plant. I mean, should this not have been understood by the verifiers, the auditors? In fact, when you read our analysis and our cover story of Down to Earth, we have quoted the reports of these verifiers. We've even named them. And you will see in their reports that in all cases, they have given a clean chit. And they have given a clean chit. And then when we have approached them and asked them on what basis did they give the clean chit, they told us it's a matter of client confidentiality. So what we are saying is the business is opaque for a very good reason. It has secrets to keep. But the most fundamental flaw, if you ask me, in this voluntary carbon market is who will get the credit in this market? In whose balance sheet should the carbon credits flow? Now, this is very important to understand because under the Paris Agreement, this is unlike the Kyoto Protocol, where certain countries had to do emission reduction and other countries did not have targets. Under the Paris Agreement, all countries have emission reduction targets. what you commonly hear of as nationally determined contributions. India, for instance, has a commitment to reduce emission intensity of its economy, to augment non-fossil fuel to meet 50% of its electricity by 2030, to have additional forests for carbon sinks. But today, we have signed 675 renewable energy projects, as we have explained to you, for 268 million tons of CO2 equivalent. So will these go into India's account? Or will, because we have already sold these as offsets and they have already been claimed by companies as they get retired to against their travel of their employees, against the air travel of people like you and me. So how can they go into India's account now? But does this mean that the Indian government will have to subtract 268 million tons of emission reduction from its from the accounts that it gives to UNFCCC for meeting its emission reduction, its nationally determined contribution? The other big question, and it's the same thing, on bulk of the trees that we are going to plant are today on land outside forests. What you keep hearing of are trees outside forests. Now, in the case of the Araku Valley, and there are many other projects like that that are coming up, the tribals have unknowingly, and they have told Rohini that they had no idea what paper they were signing, but the project developer says very clearly in writing that the rights to carbon credit have been signed away for 20 years by the tribals on the trees that they have grown on their own land. The question that we have to ask is, will India account for those additional trees in its account as additional sinks? Which trees do we not count? How do we know what trees we do not count, for which we have already sold the carbon credits? Now, in all this, therefore, what we are saying is redesign carbon markets for real change. This is critical. We have an existential threat of climate change. We cannot allow the market to do shady business in the name of climate change. We need the voluntary carbon market to be aligned with India and other countries' nationally determined contribution, NDC. Emission reductions must be counted as domestic offsets. The export for offsets, voluntary or official, must be for projects which are expensive for the country to undertake, where real change is possible. So essentially, again, the floor price that I talked about, expensive projects that we can't invest in, we want to use the market to invest in the full cost of a renewable energy project. We want to use the market to invest in hydrogen fuel. We want to use the market for hard-to-abate sectors or to upscale our public transport systems in our cities using electric vehicles. Those are the big ticket ideas and projects that are expensive for us that the market should be using, not what we are seeing today. Because otherwise, what is even worse is that countries, and this is across Africa, this is across South America, countries will sell their low-hanging fruit and cheap emission reduction options, and then be left with reductions that they cannot afford. And because they cannot afford them, they will continue to emit, and we will all lose. So the bottom line, as what we are saying, is that please redesign carbon markets to work for planet and people. The current markets do not work for either. We have a lot more detail in our report and in the investigation published in Down to Earth. Please take a look at it. Please read it. It's a serious issue that needs discussion, which needs us to talk about it and to understand how do we move forward. Thank you very much. Okay. We have some questions, Avantika. So can you help me to find some questions that we should discuss? So we have been asked by the EU CBAM. I think it's an important issue. We have written about this in addition, Avantika, and people can can look into it and can refer to it. But let's focus today on the carbon market. Now, Kishore Bhutani has asked, did you know that the project developers and companies you have flagged are also on the committee designing the voluntary market in Gift City, Gujarat? How do you contain the rot from within? Avantika, would you like to take that question? I can also take it, but I think it's a very important question that Kishore has asked.
You can go ahead now. We can add to it.
So, Kishore, I think this was an issue that we have really struggled with. In fact, if you see down to earth, my colleagues have also looked at what the Indian government has put out now as a notification of a carbon market. It has no mention of a voluntary carbon market. It only talks about a carbon market, domestic carbon market. It kind of avoids the question about export. It avoids the question of the voluntary carbon market. But when we looked at the list of people who were writing this policy, both for the Ministry of Environment and Forests, as well as who were on the committee for different consultations, it is clearly the same project developers. Now, technically, there's no harm in it. I mean, if they are in the business, they know how it works, and government, after all, is interested in public welfare, and they will modulate what private interests have to say and find a way ahead. But in our investigation, what we found is that the Indian government as yet has not at all discussed the voluntary carbon market. In fact, Mr. Singh, the minister, as we have quoted, my colleagues have quoted in Down to Earth, has talked about the carbon market. And at one time in Parliament, he gave a statement saying that the carbon market could not be used for export. But then he changed the statement, and it is not clear right now what the Indian government policy on the export of carbon credits is or on the voluntary carbon market is. Our hope is, Kishore, that this investigation will help to enlighten policymakers, because these are issues that many people don't know as well. So they will get enlightened. They will also understand what is happening. And in particular, our biggest concern, we are after all people who work on climate change. Our biggest concern is we want real emission reduction to happen. And we are finding that in most cases that these are overcredited, that the emission reduction is not happening. And we are also finding that the Indian government will be now at, and this is not just for the Indian government, it's for all African governments, all governments in our part of the world who have NDCs. How will they account for these emission reductions in their balance sheet or in the balance sheet of the companies that have already bought them and sold them? And that's really the big question that we are raising. And we hope that this will raise some answer. Okay. Richa has asked, any developer standards addressing the land tenure lengths? Rohini, Trishant, any answer on this? Land tenure. Trishant, you're on mute.
Sorry, I'm looking for the question. I did not.
I'll ask you. Basically, Richa has asked, any developer standards addressing the land tenure lengths? I think essentially asking that, do they look at the tenure issue?
I think this is one of the requirements for a project to clarify the land tenure. This is a requirement made by the crediting programs, but this is all on paper. At times, we have seen that these are not the letter of, I mean, it's not followed. So, but it's on paper. It's on paper. It's the requirement that has to be met.
Also,
But
also
Rohini, you have quoted from the project report where can you read out that paragraph from the project report that you have, where they have signed away the rights to the trees. And there's a particular wording that the project developer has used. I think it's important for everyone to get the exact wording from the report that we have quoted from the project developer and the verifier.
Pulling it out.
Okay, let me ask another question while you're asking it. Now, John Paulraj has asked that projects in the Northeast, I'm given to understand that there is interest in the region. Trishant, when you were making the database, you found a lot of projects in the Northeast, right? Would you like to explain that?
Yeah, these were mostly household and community-based projects like cook stove projects, lighting projects in the Northeast. And these are in multiple states. And since we are seeing that there's a growth in household-based projects in India, we can expect that in coming years, there will be more and more projects of this kind in that region. But there's also this, there's also a case to be made that many of the communities are completely unaware of what's going on with these projects. So yeah, we expect a rise in these kinds of projects in the Northeast.
Rohini, have you found that paragraph?
Almost.
Okay, I'll wait. Okay, any inputs on the cost involved in carbon certification process? Sajimon has asked. We have seen
Yes.
a cost of 30 to 35,000 US dollars. Prashant?
So we have discussed the cost or the fees related to the registration of projects in the project report. It depends on different carbon certification programs. There's a cost for registration, then there's a cost of getting the credits issued, and then there's a cost of the validators and verifier bodies. So it differs by the program, but it's a lot. It's a significant portion of the that a project developer has to spend.
But that's basically our question. That is why we are saying the design of the market is to meet the cost of the project developer, the verifier, the monitoring agency, the registry. The project cost, the project, the design of the project is not to do emission reduction or put money in the hands of communities. The project is basically a self-benefiting project. And that's really why the costs are very high, but the costs are not coming to the community. Our data shows that less than 10%, and at some point, just a fraction of the costs are coming to the communities. The money is all in the hands of the project developers and the whole paraphernalia, the army as we are calling it, the cozy club as we have named it, of these agents.
So our report has a table which summarizes many of the fees which are charged. And there are figures almost to the tune of $2,500 charged by Verra, up to $1,000 to $3,000 charged by Gold Standard for each project for this entire certification process to register a project. So that information is there in the report.
Yeah, so the project design document says the farmers and the communities have agreed that the property rights on carbon credits generated by this restoration are exclusively allocated to the developer of the project. And there is also the report from the verification agency, which is SCS Global Services, in its 2014 report. It says, although the ownership is with the farmers, each farmer has signed an agreement with Nandi Foundation acting on behalf of Danone, whereby they transfer the right of use on the carbon credits generated by the project. Although the agreements were made in the name of Danone, the audit team confirmed that Danone transferred any right on the project to Livelihoods Fund, a fund participated by Danone. So it confirms that Nandi Foundation, which is implementing the project, does not have any right of use since it is planting and implementing. However, it may claim rights linked to its role as a project implementer.
Thanks, Rohini. I have a very good question from Sumit, and I want to take this because it's a serious issue that we need to discuss. Because I think, Sumit, this is the first time this analysis has ever been done, and this issue has been raised. When renewable projects, energy projects are discussed, it's really about additionality, as you know. And in fact, Verra and Gold Star have stopped registering renewable energy projects, saying that they are not additional, which basically they mean is that they would happen in any case, and that the carbon offset market is not going to be needed to make the projects happen. That's the definition of additionality, and which is why these projects are not being funded. Now, first time, and I think this is the first time such an analysis, I have not seen this data before, we have done to put the capital cost of the renewable energy project. And as you will see, other than Jayaprakash Idle in Himachal, which gets about 37% of the capital cost paid for, and Trishant can explain why that is an aberration, rest of the projects, whether it's wind or solar, get only between 3 to 5%, up to 4.5% of the capital cost paid for in the first crediting period, which Trishant, correct me, is 10 years, right? In the first 10 years. Now, the question that we are raising, Sumit, and this could be an issue of debate, but what we are raising is carbon credits are being taken by an agency, say Shell. Shell has pumped in massive amounts of money, an oil company, into EKI, saying that EKI is now doing carbon offsets for them. Those projects that are coming on ground, including renewable energy projects, are projects that we will use to offset our emissions from our oil business. Now, in this, the question is, if you're paying less than 5% of the capital cost of the project, that project would have never become viable. It would have never happened. So if you are claiming a credit, should you not at least pay for the cost of the project for it to happen on ground? And that's really about the design of the market as we go ahead. As environmentalists, as people who are very strongly believe in climate change, we very strongly believe that the carbon credit market must be real and must pay the real cost. Now, I know that people in the market will disagree with us and say, even if this little bit of money is coming, it is helping a renewable energy project. It's the developers, unfortunately, very few of them were prepared to speak to us, but developers basically tell you in private, this is like a little bonus we get. It's not, the project doesn't happen because of carbon credits, but what's wrong with a little bit extra money? It goes into the project itself. But that's not what offsets are about. And I think that's a fundamental question that we are asking. We are asking a serious question on what should be the design of the market. You can disagree, but I hope we can have a longer conversation on this as we continue to work on this. Okay. Lokendra has asked from EPCO, Department of Environment, Ministry of... thank you, Lokendra ji. I'm glad we have an ally in the system. We will continue to do more work on this, and I hope we can have a conversation with the MP government as well. Trishant, correct me if I'm wrong, but when you did the state-wise analysis, MP was a large part of the carbon credits market, right?
Yes, one among the largest.
One of the largest. Okay. Do you think that the recent video released by Apple for being carbon neutral is more of a publicity stunt than reality? Honestly, I don't know what it means anymore. Apple would have to give you a disclosure on what is the carbon neutrality that it has claimed, against which project. If it tells you that, then we'll be able to tell you whether that project is real or false. But there is no such disclosure that is required. It's a lovely ad that Apple has put out, there is no doubt. But is it a real? Does it make for real change? I think today you should be asking a very big question mark. Any company which claims carbon neutrality, the first question we should be asking, give us the data, give us the detail. And as Trishant will tell you, and he has really done deep dive into the database, I think you only found that one evidence of Michelin taking offset against its employees' travel. There is no data on who is taking the carbon credit. Am I right, Trishant?
Yes, for our projects, yes.
Bhaskar Tripathi, Avantika, he's saying to a larger chat window, just open it and see. What have been the findings of RED Plus projects? Very good question, Anjali. We have looked at the Red Plus, we have not looked at, but we have looked at Araku Valley, which is also a carbon sequestration project. But yes, we will continue to do this. We do not have enough information on Red Plus. Trishant, in your report, you have discussed Red Plus. Would you like to add to that?
Yeah, it has been briefly discussed in our report. Red Plus projects are not big in India. Red Plus projects are mostly in the Latin American countries, but there are some Red Plus projects listed on the voluntary carbon market, but they are yet to be registered. There's only one I know of in the Northeast, and it's not from the voluntary carbon market as we see it.
Thank you, Trishant. Lokendra, I would suggest, very good question. Thank you for following up that question. I think the question for us as environmentalists and people who care about climate change, also care about the issue of equity and justice in climate negotiations. I think the big question for us is really, what is India's carbon credits that it needs to claim for its own nationally determined contribution? The Indian government needs a register of such projects. The Indian government needs to look at how much sequestration is happening and how it will claim that as part of its own NDCs. And as far as the requests that are coming, because there's a lot of private developers in this, and please don't get us wrong. I mean, projects like improved cook stoves, biochar that somebody asked about, or the question of biogas plants, these are important projects if they can actually work, if communities can get them, if communities will benefit, if we can see a replacement of dirty biomass towards biogas or biochar, it's very good. But we are asking, from the research we have done, we are showing you that the current design of the market is not about a fair deal for the planet or the people. So I think the governments, the state governments, should be asking some serious questions of the developers. And in particular, your case, because a number of the project developers are actually based in Indore, as we understood. And we were quite surprised to find that a lot of offices are in Indore, which we found was also quite a coincidence. So when a project is developed on agroforestry, won't farmers profit after maybe 20 years? Rohini, question to you.
So they are profiting from selling the produce currently, and they will continue to profit from the produce. But the point that we were making is that they don't get any of the proceeds from the sale of carbon credits, which is not actually happening here, but they're not really earning anything from the carbon credits. So that will continue to stay the same.
But there's an additional point here, Tapan, which you have to discuss, which we have to discuss. So what is the life of the tree? Who is allowed to cut the tree? Now they have sold, technically they have sold the right to the carbon credit to Danone via Nandi Foundation, which in turn has sold it to Livelihood Fund. Now, the carbon credit is dependent on the tree being alive and being able to sequester carbon dioxide. And in fact, if you look at the project document, which we have given, which we have quoted from, they talk about this project having a longer life than even 20 years, because they are talking about the trees being alive for a longer period, and that they will continue to earn carbon credits from it. Now, this means that a farmer actually technically cannot cut the tree, because once the tree is cut, there is no carbon credit. And as they have sold the right to the carbon credit to a foreign entity, that foreign entity actually has the right to a tree. So it's a bit convoluted, but I hope you understand what I'm saying. And that, I think, is a very serious issue. That in this marketplace, what are we really doing to the question that was asked earlier, the tenural rights of communities? Now, Ram has asked, is there any system to see if the farms are mapped? Yes, definitely we can develop technologies to map every tree, Ram, and to see whether this has been offsetted, whether it's been sold, whether it goes into the Indian government account. And, but honestly, I think we need to do much better. So I think the expose and the investigation that we have done shows you very clearly that the carbon markets run by very big players in India, designed now by very big players in India, is definitely not working for the planet or the people. There was a last question, Avantika, that you were going to read out for me.
Yeah, so Bhaskar has asked about the agricultural projects. So we can also bring in Rohini here. So he's asked that for the agriculture-based credit projects are increasing in number. Do we see that the farmers are expected to change their practices with their own money, sometimes limiting the access to big farmers only? What are the major challenges and how can they be dealt with to scale them to small farmers? He also asks, do these projects benefit the farmers at all? And his third question is on a different topic, but I think this is something we've looked into, Rohini, for the core carbon project. So if you could share some insights on the benefit sharing process, that would be great.
And this is clearly not registered yet, Rohini. So this is still within your conversation with them and what you have put down. That is, we don't know the facts on the ground because it's still not happening. But please go ahead.
A couple of farmers that I spoke to were not happy with the incentives they would receive because if they follow alternate wetting and drying, that means they have to. So during the drying period, what happens is they'll have to use more, weedicide to actually herbicide, to cut. So when it's fully inundated, in the conventional practice, it's done to keep the weed in check. But when it's dried up, then there is a possibility of weed growth and they have to use more herbicides. So they weren't really happy with the incentives they would be receiving. But the project developer later told me that they plan to increase the incentives in the due process. Yeah.
Good. So I think that's something, as we've reported, as we heard, we will, I hope somebody or we will keep tracking all this to see what happens. I thought there were one or two things in the chat, Avantika, before I close, that I thought we should basically, I think somebody has said that Rajesh has talked about bamboo very clearly, very important, Rajesh. I think wonderful way to sequester carbon and to keep it at a short life. We are not, please understand, we're not against any one of these projects. We're just simply saying, is the emission reduction real? Is it overestimated? And is the developer, which is a rich developer, rich company, actually paying the true cost of the emission reduction? And we are asking, in whose account should that go? We are asking for these issues to be sorted out as the carbon market focuses on. Yes, I wanted to raise this. Ramesh Kannan's point, I keep hearing this, that we should not focus on carbon emissions, we should focus on other aspects like water credits. I keep hearing about biodiversity credits. Now everything is a credit. Plastic credits, I'm hearing. Everything is about the market. Wonderful. I mean, I have no problems. Let the market rules be designed for integrity. What we are showing you is a market which is not designed for good governance or integrity. Tell me of any market which is designed with this shroud of secrecy and still can tell you that, yes, they have a credible system going. I mean, are you ever being asked or will you be asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement before you can go to a project site? This is India. This is a village in India. And yet Rohini and Trishant were told blandly that no, we will not allow you to go to the village, to our project site, till you sign a non-disclosure agreement. We then track the name of the village through the project document and then reach the village without telling the developer. So you have to understand how opaque this market is. And as I say in my conclusions, it is right to be opaque because it has a lot of secrets to keep. And I think that's the secrets that I hope we have been able to reveal to you today. And I hope that will help policymakers in India and across the world and at COP28 to clean up. This is not a market that we can afford. This design of a market must go. We are clearly saying that the voluntary carbon market as it is currently designed is not good for the planet or for people, and it must be closed down. Thank you very much. With those very strong words, I hope you understand our level of anguish as we have done this investigation. And we bring it to you at a time when the world is so hit and racked by climate change. Thank you.